June 1462, and you're an Ottoman soldier marching through Wallachia with 90,000 men, the most powerful army on earth. Constantinople fell to this same force 9 years ago, and empires have crumbled under its advance across 3 continents. Now you're here to destroy one man, a minor prince who refused to pay tribute, and it should take days, maybe weeks at most. That's when you smell it, something sweet and rotting so thick you can taste it coating your tongue. Your column slows as the scouts stop moving, and when you crest the hill outside the capital city, the sight waiting for you defies everything you thought you understood about war. A forest stands before you, but the trees aren't trees. 20,000 human beings hang suspended on wooden stakes, arranged in perfect geometric circles stretching as far as you can see. Some have been dead for weeks, their bodies bloated and blackened and picked apart by birds, while others are still breathing, still moving, still making sounds that will follow you into your nightmares for the rest of your life. Your Sultan, the man who conquered the Byzantine Empire, stares in silence before speaking words that change everything. It is not possible to deprive of his country a man who has done such great deeds, and that's when 90,000 soldiers turn around and march home. What kind of mind creates something like this? And here's the part that should disturb you, because this wasn't madness. This was mathematics, cold and calculated and devastatingly effective. The story you think you know about Vlad the Impaler is incomplete, not because the horror didn't happen, but because the why behind it is far more unsettling than the what. This is the full account of how one broken child weaponized human suffering so effectively that he turned back an empire, and I'm going to show you exactly how it happened. Before we get there, you need to understand who Vlad actually was, because the vampire mythology and the Dracula legend let us off the hook. Imagining him as something inhuman is easier than confronting the real horror, which is that everything he did was learned. 1442, and Vlad is 11 years old when his father, Vlad the Second Dracula, makes a deal that will destroy his family. Keeping his throne in Wallachia requires handing over his 2 youngest sons as hostages to the Ottoman Empire, living collateral to guarantee his loyalty. Young Vlad and his 7-year-old brother Radu are torn from their home and delivered to the Sultan, not to dungeons, but to the palace, where they receive fine clothes, elite education, and military training in Turkish, Arabic, philosophy, and horsemanship. On the surface, it looks like privilege, but here's the thing, this wasn't education, this was psychological engineering. 6 years passed with Vlad watching his captors perfect the art of empire, from age 11 to 17. Ottoman methods for using fear as a governing tool became his curriculum, and he witnessed public executions designed not to punish but to traumatize entire populations into submission. Contemporary accounts record that his tutor held authorization to use the whip during training, and Vlad, who couldn't control his anger, took beatings repeatedly. One other lesson embedded itself during those years. He was utterly powerless, his life depending entirely on his father's loyalty, while his father kept breaking promises. Think about what that does to a child's psychology, the hypervigilance and emotional numbness and obsessive need for control that modern analysts identify in trauma survivors. But here's where the brothers' paths split apart, because while Vlad hardened, Radu adapted. Byzantine chronicler Chalco-Condyles recorded that Radu attracted the attention of young Sultan Mehmed, the future conqueror of Constantinople, and became his companion. Whether survival strategy or genuine attachment, that relationship created a wound between the brothers that would never heal. 1448 brought Vlad's release after 6 years of captivity, and he was 17 years old. 2 months later, assassins sent by rival nobles called the Boyars killed his father, and his older brother Mircea suffered worse, blinded with a red-hot poker and buried alive. Vlad stood alone, surrounded by enemies, backed by no one, carrying 6 years of Ottoman education in exactly how terror works. If you're fascinated by the psychological breaking points that create history's most feared figures, hit subscribe, because we're just getting started with how this traumatized boy became something his captors never imagined. 8 years of exile followed, filled with plotting, studying, and watching. 1456 brought Hungarian backing, and Vlad seized the Wallachian throne at last. The transformation came immediately. His coronation feast should have been a celebration, but it became a statement instead. Invitations went out to the Boyar families, the same nobles who had orchestrated his father's murder and buried his brother alive, and hundreds arrived in their finest clothes believing they were there to pledge loyalty. Wine flowed freely through the hall, and that's when Vlad stood and asked a simple question. How many princes have you lived through? Older boyars answered proudly, claiming 7, 10, some boasting they remembered a dozen different rulers. They were bragging about political survival, their ability to outlast any prince who sat on the throne. Vlad smiled before giving his order. But here's where the methodical mind reveals itself, because he didn't simply execute them. Separation came first, sorted by age and usefulness. Architects of his family's destruction faced impalement immediately outside the palace walls, while younger, stronger nobles and their families were stripped of their fine clothes and force-marched 50 miles to the ruins of Ponari Castle. One choice awaited them there, and it wasn't really a choice at all. Rebuild the fortress with their bare hands or die. Months of hauling stones up 1,480 steps followed until their clothes rotted off their bodies. Most died during construction, and survivors were never the same. This wasn't revenge playing out, this was restructuring. Vlad erased the old power structure and replaced it with men who owed everything to him and lived in absolute terror of his displeasure. But domestic politics were just the beginning, and what came next sent shockwaves across empires. 1459 brought envoys from Sultan Mehmed the Second, the same Mehmed who had been Vlad's childhood companion in captivity, demanding the annual tribute. An insult accompanied the demand. Vlad was to present himself personally in Constantinople. Ottoman envoys arrived expecting negotiation, and when they refused to remove their turbans, citing genuine religious custom, Vlad asked them to explain their tradition. They did, probably relieved he seemed interested rather than offended. Vlad's response must have frozen there. Blood. I respect a man who honors his faith so completely. Let me help you honor it forever. Guards received orders to nail the turbans directly to their skulls. Think about the calculation that cruelty required. Death wasn't the point, mutilation was. Designed in a way both symbolically loaded and medically precise enough to ensure they'd survive the journey back to Constantinople. They became walking messages. Mehmed received his envoys, men he'd sent in good faith now permanently disfigured, and understood immediately. This wasn't the hostage boy he remembered. This was something new, something that had taken Ottoman lessons in terror and evolved them into a weapon even the Ottomans hadn't imagined. War became inevitable. Early 1462 brought a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Vlad launched raids deep into Ottoman territory, and a letter to the Hungarian king dated February 11, 1462 claimed a specific number: 23,084 Turks killed in a single winter campaign. Not thousands, not many. 23,884, a precise body count kept by his own hand. Mehmed's response assembled 90,000 men, more than triple Wallachia's entire military-age male population. This wasn't an invasion, this was an extermination. But Vlad refused conventional battle. Ottoman soldiers entering Wallachia found nothing: empty villages and poisoned wells and burned fields, every potential source of food and water systematically destroyed. Night raids began soon after, small groups of 50 to 100 men striking Ottoman camps in darkness, killing sentries, setting fires, disappearing before any response could form. Defeating the army wasn't the goal, making them paranoid, exhausted, and terrified was. And that's when the masterpiece came. June 17th, 1462, and Vlad learned that Sultan Mehmed himself was camped near the capital with his personal guard. This opportunity would never come again. 7,000 men followed Vlad personally into the Ottoman camp under cover of darkness, dressed in captured Turkish uniforms and speaking fluent Turkish from his years as a hostage. One goal drove the attack: kill the Sultan. Byzantine chroniclers recorded what happened next. That great terror seized the camp as the Sultan's men believed some large foreign army had attacked them, that they believed they were utterly doomed. Ottoman units attacked each other in the confusion while Vlad's cavalry routed an entire wing, coming within yards of Mehmed's tent. The assassination failed for 3 reasons. Vlad became disoriented in the massive camp and attacked the wrong tents. A secondary force supposed to attack from the opposite direction never arrived because their commander lost his nerve, and elite janissaries rallied to form a protective ring around the Sultan. Retreat into darkness came as suddenly as the attack had begun. Physical casualties stayed relatively light, perhaps 5,000 dead on each side, but the psychological damage proved catastrophic. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, surrounded by his own army, had nearly been assassinated by a vastly outnumbered enemy who struck from nowhere and vanished like ghosts. Rattled commanders, exhausted soldiers, and days of marching through dead landscape where every shadow might hide an enemy remained between them and Vlad's capital. And then they reached Targovishte and saw what Vlad had been preparing. No written description can fully capture it, but we have to try. The smell came first, decay so thick it coated the back of your throat, and then stakes appeared. 1, then 10, then 100, and then the realization that there was no end. Chalker condyles measured it precisely, 17 stades long by 7 stades wide, roughly 2 miles by half a mile. 20,000 bodies filled that space, men and women and children, arranged in perfect concentric circles radiating outward from the capital. Stakes of different heights corresponded to rank, the lowest for peasants, the highest for commanders. Hamza Pasha hung at the center on the tallest stake of all, a high-ranking Ottoman commander Mehmed had sent months earlier to capture Vlad. Vlad discovered the trap, turned the tables, and kept Hamza alive specifically for this moment. Remnants of military finery still dressed the body, positioned to face directly towards the route of the Sultan's approach. A personal message: "This is what I do to your best men, imagine what I'll do to you. And here's what should haunt you, some of them were still alive." Vlad's method used stakes inserted at angles designed to avoid vital organs, keeping victims conscious for days. Contemporary accounts describe moaning that could be heard across the entire field. Mehmed II, the man who watched Constantinople's walls crumble and who had ordered his own share of executions, reportedly stopped his horse and stared in silence. His words followed: "It is not possible to deprive of his country a man who has done such great deeds, who has such a diabolical understanding of how to govern his realm and its people." This wasn't praise, this was recognition. The Sultan acknowledged that conventional military thinking didn't apply here, that Vlad wasn't trying to win battles but to break minds. Days later, Mehmed ordered a general retreat. The most powerful military force on earth had invaded a tiny principality with overwhelming numbers and turned back, not from military defeat but from pure psychological warfare. Vlad had won. But here's where the tragedy reveals itself, because the methods that defeated the Ottomans didn't stop with the Ottomans. Months after his greatest triumph, Vlad was impaling Wallachian merchants for price gouging, boyars for suspected disloyalty, and entire villages for minor infractions. A golden cup placed at a public fountain was never stolen because everyone understood the punishment. Terror that saved his country had become his only tool for everything. Political collapse came rapidly. Radu, his brother, backed by Ottoman gold, positioned himself as the sane alternative, while Hungarian support evaporated as Vlad's behavior grew increasingly erratic. November 1462 brought betrayal from his own allies, just months after the Forest of the Impaled turned back an empire. King Matthias of Hungary ordered his arrest based on forged letters, probably created by Saxon merchants with their own grievances, and 12 years of Hungarian captivity followed. 1476 brought a brief return to the throne. 2 months of rule followed. Late December 1476 ended everything in battle against an Ottoman force, and the circumstances remain murky. Some sources claim his own men killed him after mistaking him for a Turk, which makes sense given how often he wore Turkish disguises. His head was severed, preserved in honey, and sent to Constantinople for display. After everything, the terror and the impalement fields and the psychological warfare, Vlad ended up as a trophy in the capital of the very empire he'd fought his entire life. Snagov Monastery allegedly received his body for burial. Excavations in the 1930s found an empty tomb. To this day, no one knows where his actual remains are. Romania celebrates Vlad as a national hero, a brutal but effective leader who defended his people against impossible odds, while the rest of the world turned him into a vampire thanks to Bram Stoker. A monster, something supernatural. But here's what the vampire legend obscures. Everything Vlad did was human, painfully, terrifyingly human. Birth didn't make him a monster, a system forged him, one that taught him power comes through terror, that survival requires absolute ruthlessness, that empathy is weakness. Those lessons became refined to their logical extreme. The Forest of the Impaled wasn't madness, it was applied psychology with every stake precisely positioned and every body serving a purpose. Against an army 10 times his size, it worked. Whether Vlad was evil isn't the question, because that answer is obvious. The real question is what it says about us that his methods proved so effective, what it reveals about human psychology that 20,000 corpses could turn back an empire, and what other calculated horrors hide in history's shadows, designed by men who understood exactly what breaks the human mind. If you want to keep uncovering the uncomfortable truths that textbooks bury, subscribe to Ancient History Hub, because history's darkest chapters aren't just about what happened, they're about understanding why it worked, and that's the knowledge we can't afford to forget.